Being Creative with Tad Williams. Part 4.
Deborah Beale reads from the Dragons of Ordinary Farm.
Who lives on the farm, who is a witch, entices in a little girl who is our lead character, Lucinda, and basically pumps her for information using magic. And so this is something that we've always enjoyed in our house. So this is why we decided to read it today. Lucinda has been found, she's had an accident, and Mrs. Needle, who is the witch, has given her a potion to cure the cut on her hand, but it's also had some other effects as well. She nodded her head slowly, then looked up at Lucinda and smiled. "Would you like to see a little trick?" Lucinda could only nod. She had suddenly noticed at some point that Mrs. Needle had let down her black hair. It was much longer than Lucinda had guessed, halfway down her back or more. Letting your hair down. She understood the expression now. It meant being friends, feeling comfortable. Right now she felt very comfortable. Watch then. Mrs. Needle folded the bloodied handkerchief. Watch then. Mrs. Needle folded the bloodied handkerchief into a ball so that only the white was visible, then closed her fingers around it entirely, making a fist. Look closely. She opened her hand and the wadded handkerchief slowly unwound until the bloodstain was again visible. But it had changed shape. Now it looked like the silhouette of a girl. With its long, straight hair, it could almost be Lucinda herself. Then the red silhouette began to move. It might have been only Mrs. Needle gently flexing her hand, but it looked like the little blood Lucinda was dancing. Oh, Lucinda let out her breath. Oh, wow! How'd you do that? Mrs. Needle closed her fingers on the handkerchief once more. Just a little trick, an amusement. You enjoyed it? Lucinda felt as if her head was as big and round and light as a helium balloon. Can you do it again? Mrs. Needle shook her head sadly. It only works once, I'm sad to say. She brightened. But if you could bring me something of your brother's, I could show you another charming trick. Would you like that? Something of blood, like this. Or maybe just some hair. But I don't know where he is. He went out somewhere. Did he now? Well, why don't you have a look in his room? Perhaps he's left a comb there. When Mrs. Needle smiled, she looked like a beautiful queen from a fairy tale. Why don't you go see? I'll get lost again, Lucinda told her sadly. No, you won't. Just go out that door. Oh, do hurry. I'm having such a good time with you. I don't want to waste any of it. Lucinda walked to the door, dizzy and uncertain. It felt like the most popular girl in school had suddenly decided she wanted Lucinda for a best friend. And that was thrilling, wasn't it? Mrs. Needle had been absolutely right. Once out the door, Lucinda climbed a single staircase and found herself in the hallway she shared with Tyler. He still wasn't back, but she pushed his unlatched door open and went in. It was already a typical Tyler mess, which was pretty impressive considering he'd only had a day or two to get it started. She found his hairbrush where he'd dropped it on the floor near the bed, its bristles snarled with his light brown hair. Normally, she wouldn't have touched any of Tyler's personal items without putting on a hazmat suit. But at this moment, she was feeling dreamy and distant, and the prospect of not doing this thing seemed so bad, so hard, like swimming against incoming waves. It wouldn't matter so much, not really. She found her way back to Mrs. Needle's room with the same weird ease. One moment she was in the hall, the next sitting at the table again. Oh, well done! Mrs. Needle clapped her hands. There was something so charmingly open the way she did that. Here, let me have it. The Englishwoman peeled one of Tyler's long hairs out of the knot wrapped around the bristles and put the single hair in a little dish, then passed her hand over it once and struck a match. The hair burned blue for a moment and made a puff of smoke that seemed far too large for the size of the flame. Then the smoke swirled into a shape. Tyler's face, as unmistakable as a photograph. Her brother was brushing his hair and his features were contorted in a grimace of pain because the hairbrush had caught in a tangle. Lucinda and Mrs. Needle both laughed. A moment later, the smoke Tyler fell apart. "That's amazing! I'm so glad you enjoyed it." Mrs. Needle handed her back the hairbrush. The entire tangle of hair was gone, although she had only burned one. "I do love to make children happy. Now have some more tea, dear, and let's talk. I want you to tell me everything. You see, I'm really very interested in you and Tyler, but I know so little about you." Mrs. Needle laughed again and patted Lucinda's arm. "Did your mother give you good advice for your trip in the days after she received Gideon's letter?" Lucinda giggled in sour amusement. "She must have had some wise things to say, your mother." When Lucinda's giggles became outright laughter, Mrs. Needle frowned kindly and put her cold hand over Lucinda's. "I'm so sorry, I don't mean to pry if it's difficult to talk about her. Is she hard to get along with?" "Yes, sometimes," said Lucinda. "She doesn't really listen to me." She frowned, trying to remember. What did she say? God, she's always talking, but she never really says anything. "Oh, yeah. She said she hadn't known we had a rich relative and would we please not scare him off." "Oh," she said, full of a pleasurable sense of naughtiness. "I feel like I want to tell you just everything." "Then do so, dear," Mrs. Needle said, smiling. "We'll be such good friends. I promise you won't find a better listener than me." Lucinda talked and talked, and out came more than she had ever told anyone in her life. She didn't know why she wanted to talk so much, but it seemed so natural to share all kinds of secrets. As the sky went from dark purple to black beyond the windows, as the two of them sat like old friends in the room, reeking of white lilies and the faint tang of blood.
Let zebra be your zero. Always ask.